Right now, somewhere in the world, a bee just died, and nobody noticed. Not one person, not one headline, just a tiny creature, 120 milligrams heavy, there one moment, gone the next. And yet scientists will tell you that moment matters, that enough of those moments, quietly stacking up across the planet, could set off a chain reaction we are completely unprepared for. Today we're going to talk about the most consequential creature on the planet that almost nobody thinks about. We're not going to tell you the world ends tomorrow, but we are going to show you the actual numbers, the biology, the economics, the engineering, behind something that pollinates 1 in 3 bites of food you'll eat today. This is a deep dive on the bee, and by the end, you might never look at a jar of honey the same way again. Let's start with a number most people have never heard. When someone says bee, they picture one thing, the fuzzy yellow and black striped bee from cartoons, the one on honey jars. That bee. That bee is real, but it's one species out of roughly 20,000. 20,000 species of bees exist on this planet right now. Most of them are solitary. No hive, no honey, no queen. They nest in hollow stems, in cracks in walls, in patches of bare soil. They live and die completely invisible to us, quietly doing their work. The one we're going to spend most of our time on today is Apis mellifera, the western honeybee. It's the one humans domesticated. Originally from Africa and Eurasia, it hitched a ride on our ships and spread to every continent except Antarctica. It's the world's most managed insect, and it's in serious trouble. But first, what actually is a bee? Because it's stranger and more sophisticated than most of us realize. A honeybee worker weighs about 120 milligrams. You can balance one on a fingernail and barely feel it. And yet, inside that barely there body is a sensory system that makes some of our best technology look clumsy. Start with the eyes. Bees have 5 of them, 2 large compound eyes on the sides of their head and 3 small simple eyes on top. The compound eyes see in ultraviolet. Flowers that look plain and single-colored to us, a white daisy, a yellow buttercup, are, to a bee, vivid landing pads covered in ultraviolet patterns, lines and shapes pointing directly toward the nectar. Evolution built a billboard system, and bees evolved the eyes to read it. The antennae are multi-tool sensors. They detect odors, temperature, humidity, air vibrations, and surface texture. A bee is essentially tasting and feeling and smelling the world simultaneously, using 2 thin rods on its head at all times. Then there are the legs. The hind legs have what's called a pollen basket, a small curved groove lined with stiff hairs. As the bee moves through a flower, it combs pollen off its body, moistens it with a little nectar, and packs it into this basket. A fully loaded bee flies back to the hive with 2 visible golden or orange spheres on its back legs, sometimes half its body weight in pollen. The stinger. Only females have one, and only worker bees have the barbed version. It's serrated like a fish hook, which means when a worker bee stings a mammal and tries to pull away, the stinger stays embedded. The bee tears itself apart, escaping. It's a one-shot weapon that kills the user. The queen is different. Her stinger is smooth. She can sting repeatedly without harm, but she almost never uses it, only to eliminate rival queens. Now let's go inside the hive, because what happens there is genuinely one of the most complex biological phenomena on Earth. Biologists have a specific word for it: superorganism. A single hive at peak summer can house between 40,000 and 100,000 individual bees, and the entire thing operates as if it were a single living being. Every bee plays the role of a cell in a larger body, specialized, coordinated, and replaceable. No manager, no central control room, just chemistry, instinct, and one of nature's most elegant communication systems. One queen. She doesn't rule in any way we'd recognize. She doesn't give orders. Her role is biological. She lays up to 2,000 eggs per day during active season, nearly non-stop. She can live up to 5 years. Workers, by contrast, burn out in about 6 weeks in summer. Their wings literally fray from use. The drones, the males, have exactly one job: mate with a young queen. They don't forage, they don't build, they don't guard. They eat and wait. And when autumn comes, the colony makes a brutal calculation. There's no point feeding hundreds of non-working males through a cold winter. The workers simply stop letting them back in. The drones die of cold and starvation within days. It sounds ruthless. It's just arithmetic. Worker bees have perhaps the most fascinating career arc in nature, a built-in job rotation based purely on age. In their first days of life, they clean cells. Then they become nurses, feeding larvae. Then builders, secreting wax. Then guards, standing at the hive entrance checking for threats. And only in the last 2 weeks of their short lives do they become foragers, flying out to collect nectar and pollen. Each bee knows what to do, without being told. There's no orientation session, no supervisor. The transition happens through hormonal changes as the bee ages. Age determines role. Role determines the colony's function. In 1946, an Austrian biologist named Carl von Frisch made a discovery so strange that when he first announced it, many colleagues didn't believe him. He'd spent years watching bees on glass-sided observation hives, and he'd cracked something nobody had seen before. Bees have language. When a forager bee returns from finding a rich food source, she doesn't just go back to work. She performs a dance on the surface of the comb, the waggle dance. It has 3 pieces of encoded information: the direction to the food source, relative to the position of the sun, the distance to it, encoded in how long the straight run of the dance lasts, and the quality of the source, encoded in the energy and duration of the overall performance. The other bees watch, follow, and navigate accurately to a location they have never seen. Von Frisch won the Nobel Prize in 1973 for this discovery. What he'd found puts bees in a very small club of animals that use symbolic language, a system where one thing stands in for another thing that isn't present. That kind of abstract representation was supposed to be uniquely human. It's not. Now for the product everyone associates with bees, and the one that turns out to be far more interesting than it looks on a grocery shelf. Honey begins as nectar, a thin, watery sugar solution inside flowers. A forager bee collects it using her proboscis, a tube-like tongue, and stores it in a special organ called the honey stomach. This is separate from her digestive system. It holds about 40 milligrams of liquid. To fill it, she visits anywhere from 100 to 1,500 flowers in a single trip. While the nectar sits in the honey stomach, enzymes, especially one called invertase, begin breaking down the sucrose into simpler sugars, glucose and fructose. This chemical process continues when the bee returns to the hive and passes the nectar, mouth to a processing bee, who processes it further, then passes it on. This chain can repeat multiple times. Eventually, the partially processed nectar gets deposited into honeycomb cells, where the hive's ventilation crew takes over. Hundreds of bees fan their wings to create airflow. Water evaporates. The nectar, initially about 80% water, slowly concentrates down to under 18%. At that point, it's honey. Here's the number that should stop you cold. To produce 1 teaspoon of honey, the collective effort works out to roughly 120,000 kilometers of flying, about 3 laps around the Earth, and 2 million flower visits. A single worker bee in her entire 6-week life produces about half a teaspoon.
Half. That jar on your kitchen table? That's hundreds of lifetimes of labor in glass. And honey doesn't expire. Archaeologists have found honey in Egyptian tombs that was 3,000 years old and still edible. 3,000 years. 3 reasons. The water content is too low for bacteria or mold to survive. The pH sits around 3.9. Highly acidic, hostile to most microorganisms, and an enzyme called glucose oxidase produces small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, a natural antiseptic. Honey is essentially preserved by its own chemistry.
Honey gets all the attention, but it might not actually be the most remarkable thing bees produce. Beeswax. Worker bees secrete it from glands on their abdomen. The cost is steep. Bees must consume roughly 8 kilograms of honey to produce 1 kilogram of wax. It's expensive material, and the colony uses it for everything. Humans have been using it for thousands of years. Candles, cosmetics, wood polish, waterproofing, pharmaceutical coatings. Your grandmother's lip balm almost certainly had beeswax in it.